and welcome to Kitchen Table Talks. My name is Toni Austin Allen, and I am here with Dr. Roy Austin, author of Definitions for Living, a book dedicated to helping you live more effectively and happily, both personally and in your relationships with others. A number of years ago, Dr. Austin compiled numerous articles which he had written to assist his clients into what is now his book, Definitions for Living, making sense of words and ideas that define our lives. Recently, he and I began sitting at our kitchen table and talking about his book, and we became excited about the possibility of sharing our conversations with others who might benefit from them. The podcast you are about to listen to are the product of the recordings we began making of our conversations. We have discussed the book chapter by chapter and have produced this series of podcasts to accompany the printed version of the book, which is now available as an ebook on various publishing websites. Although we believe you will benefit greatly from the podcasts themselves, you will get the most out of them by purchasing the book, reading each chapter prior to listening to the podcast, and having it available to follow along with our conversations. The ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribe, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We hope you enjoy our talks at our kitchen table as much as we have, and that your life will be greatly enriched by having shared our conversations with us. We're on Chapter 21, Pyrite Rules. And since this is such a short little chapter, I don't see any reason why we couldn't just read through this and expound on it, because it's so concise and so strong. So if that's okay with you.
Surely, yeah. We'll just read it, and then we'll have some comments or questions as we go along.
All right. Well, you want to read the introduction, and then I'll read the rules.
I will.
Okay.
Most people are familiar with a well-known principle of life called the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Various religions and philosophies express it a little differently, but the message is usually the same. The general idea is that if you want to get along well with your fellow humans, seek to treat them the way you would like to be treated. Those who have a mature understanding of this principle and who practice it consistently find that its value to their lives is like that of fine gold. On the other hand, though, there's another set of so-called rules which many have learned early in life and by which they continue to pattern their daily behaviors. I call these the Pyrite Rules. Pyrite is a shiny, gold-like mineral which inexperienced gold prospectors used to mistake for the real thing. When a greenhorn prospector would rush into town and excitedly announce to everyone that he had struck the mother lode, they would say, "You fool, that's nothing but old pyrite." Hence it became known as fool's gold. My Pyrite Rules, discussed below, fit into the same category of so many beliefs and behaviors in life which are thought to be the real thing. They seem true, rewarding, and right at the time, but prove to be sadly disappointing when put into practice. For this reason, then, they could also be called fool's golden rules. For people who believe in and practice them eventually discover that what they thought would make them happy only brings them conflict and grief.
All right, so I'm going to read the Pyrite Rules, and then any time you want to fill in, I'll stop after each one.
Mm-hmm, sure.
So, number 1, do unto others as they do unto you. This rule is otherwise known as revenge. Do not let other people hurt you and get by with it. Pay them back. Get even. It feels so good to hurt people who have hurt you. How many books and films have been based on this?
Based on exactly this idea. Now, of course, the flip side of that is that if you happen to be around a few people who are healthy and loving and kind and compassionate toward you, that would be okay to practice that if you treat other people the way they treat you, as long as they treat you well.
Yes, yes.
Then that would make sense to do that. But this rule is usually interpreted, or I interpret it as the revenge concept. When someone hurts you, then you hurt them back. Don't let them get by with it. And it's usually in a negative context when people practice this rule. Mm-hmm. It's if you hurt me, then I'm gonna hurt you twice as bad. Mm-hmm. And you've heard the old saying, "Revenge is sweet."
Yeah.
And a lot of people actually believe that. And at the time, it may have that satisfying feel to it, is that I got back. I didn't let them walk all over me. But then a lifetime of practicing that really brings a lot of misery. And that's what you do see reflected in a lot of stories and movies and books that are based on revenge. It's a pretty miserable outcome.
We see that in the history of men a lot. If you hit me, I'm going to hit you right back.
Right.
And fights all the time. And now women, I hate to say it, are just as bad. We're seeing it all over the place.
Yeah. It's a very, very common so-called rule by which people live.
Yeah. Oh, but one more thing on that. This has become easier to do with social media.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's
right.
become rampant. And with teenagers, it's terrible.
And it really brings a lot of terrible conflict, because in social media, you have no accountability.
Yes.
You can hurt somebody who you think has slighted you or hurt you, or just because you're an angry person anyway. Mm-hmm. And you can hurt people real easily on social media and get by with it because there's no accountability.
Yeah.
No one holds your feet to the fire, and there's no consequences to it.
That makes sense. Number 2, do unto others before they do unto you. I've seen this quite a bit. People who are afraid. Says, get the drop on other people. Assume they are going to eventually hurt you, and make sure you hurt them first. The pain of a ruined relationship is lessened if you are the one who does the blaming, hurting, and rejecting.
Tony, I've seen this so often. Even in a recent conversation I had with someone, in close, intimate relationships, mm-hmm. people will be so afraid of being rejected because they have very, very low self-esteem. Mm-hmm. They believe deep down inside that they're unlovable, and that if people get to know them well enough, that the other person will say, "Ooh, I don't like you. I didn't know that about you. You're not a good person to be around." And they're going to reject me if they get to know me well enough. So they will get into a relationship because they want the intimacy and the pleasure of a good relationship. But then they get cold feet and they get scared. Okay, the better this person gets to know me, they're going to break my heart. So I'll do it first. And so I will play a game called blemish. It's described very well in a book called Games Alcoholics Play. Mm-hmm. But really it's a game everybody plays. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's just given a lot of attention in that particular book. And so they look for flaws in people. Well, she wasn't the right kind of person. She's a little too young for me, or he doesn't make quite enough money, or he has a wart on his nose, or something like that.
Yeah.
They find a flaw, a blemish in the other person, which gives them an excuse to end the relationship first and then blame it on the fault or the blemish in that other person. And so therefore they get out of the relationship because they don't want to be the one rejected. They want to be the rejector.
Could it be also that they might, I mean, through their fear, because I've watched this before, through their fear, they are sensing that person may be pulling away from them, or they're sensing tension between them, and it's like, I better get out of this before they do it, because they can't handle the rejection.
Exactly. If things are not going just really, really well, you know, when the so-called honeymoon period or the infatuation period is over, and there's an argument or disagreement or something, or someone lets them down or doesn't keep a date with them, then they start saying, I don't think this is going to work out. Instead of talking to that person about it and finding out what's going on, they just walk away from it. And you may never hear from them again.
Right.
Because of this very Pyrite rule. Before they do it to me, I'm going to do it to them. It doesn't hurt quite so much.
Yeah. Number 3, do for others only what they do for you. Play it safe. Do not give more than you get. You may wind up getting shortchanged and feel deprived and unloved. Make people realize they don't get something for nothing from you. Otherwise, they will only take advantage of your good nature. Make them pay for what they get. Sounds like such a difficult path to go on.
Yeah, a lot of people in some part of their earlier life have been disappointed and let down, or what they call betrayed, or something like that, or they feel like they've been cheated. And so they have this Pyrite rule that says, I'm not going to do anything for other people unless they do it for me as well. You know, it's got to be tit for tat, or I don't want to feel cheated, so I'm not going to do anything for others. I'm going to find out what they got to offer me.
There's a real bitterness in this way of thinking, it seems like, or it could lead to that.
Yeah, that's where the bitterness comes in, when they've been hurt so much or betrayed, and so they're not going to give an inch.
Right.
There's no true gifting of yourself or things to other people. There's always a string attached to it.
Right.
I've done this for you. What are you going to do for me?
4, do unto others as you think they want you to do unto them. Do not bother to ask them what they need or want from you. Assume you can read their minds. Do what you believe is good for them. Actual communication is a waste of time.
Now, this is particularly applicable to people who are, they fit into the rescue triangle as the rescuer. The other two parts of the triangle, of course, are persecutor and victim. But rescuers are people who will jump in and try to be helpful before they check with you whether you want their help or not.
Right.
And I think we've all been guilty of that from time to time.
Oh, not me. I would never do that.
I know what's good for this person, and you'll hear it in words like, well, if I were you, I would, or what you need to do is, or my advice to you is. And so they're always offering themselves with this good intention of helping someone else in this rescuer role, but they don't bother to say, is there something I can do to be helpful?
Yeah.
And so this is particularly relevant when you have these people helpers who don't bother to check it out first if their help is desired.
You know, I certainly can fall into this easily because I'm a people helper. But when you do think about the golden rule, because I know what it feels like when somebody does that to me and I don't like it. You know,
Right.
it makes me go, oh, don't do that to me. So if I can remember that's how it makes me feel, then I can remember, oh, I don't want somebody to do that to me, so I shouldn't do that to somebody else.
And that's a good cue to use in all of these, is before we open our mouth or before we do anything, particularly like give advice or something, to ask ourselves this golden rule question, this litmus test question. Do I like it when people tell me what I need to do, what I ought to do, what I should do, etc.? And how does that make me feel when someone steps in to so-called help me without bothering to ask me if I need their help or what kind of help I need? So that's a good thing to keep in mind. Ask yourself the question, do I like people to treat me this way that I'm just getting ready to treat this person? But usually we bypass that question and just go ahead and blurt it out. And it's pretty offensive to people to do it that way because we're offended by it. So that's the golden rule litmus test is, how do I feel when people do the same with me, like giving me unsolicited advice?
I mean, that's just such a good rule of thumb. I mean, I'm glad we're talking about this because all you have to do is ask yourself that question. It can solve so many problems.
It absolutely does, but we barely ask ourselves that question. Am I getting ready to treat this person the way I would like to be treated? We just bypass that altogether.
That's right. Number 5, do unto self before others do unto you. Assume that others want to punish or reject you. Punish yourself before they can. It will not hurt quite so much. Besides, if they see you do it to yourself, they may leave you alone.
Yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory.
That's pretty manipulative.
Yeah, it really is. But a lot of people really do believe this Pyrite rule, that they need to punish themselves, and you see it all the time.
To the point of self-flagellation, you know, and saying terrible things about yourself.
That self-criticism, that self-censoring is a common thing that people do. That they're so afraid of being criticized, they'll beat you to the punch and criticize themselves. And it's a very, very common Pyrite rule.
And number 6, the final one. Do unto self as others do unto you. Use other people as authorities on how you should feel toward yourself and how you should treat yourself. After all, they know more about what is right for you than you do. Hoo-wee.
That's a big one.
That's a real big one. I think many of us do that.
We do, and this comes from early childhood when we really were children and did not know about life or how to feel about ourselves and what to think of ourselves. It's a self-esteem type thing, and the way we're treated as children has a lot to do with how we treat ourselves after we become adults. And so if we are mistreated and abused or neglected or shamed or constantly being criticized, then when we become adults, we will tend to do exactly the same thing to ourselves, even though we hated it when we were children and intuitively knew it was wrong because it hurt so much, but because these people are still our authorities in that child part of our brain that says, well, if I'm treated badly by this person who is an authority, and it could be a parent, it could be a grandfather, it could be a minister, it could be a babysitter, it could be a school teacher, who shames you and puts you down in class. Could be any person, a big person in a place of authority, and to a child, most everybody fits that category. Then that gets programmed into the brain that says, well, it must be something wrong with me, or else they wouldn't treat me that way. And this is clarified, by the way, in that book, Healing the Shame That Binds You, mm-hmm. by Bradshaw. Mm-hmm. And he goes into this in great detail, is that if we're mistreated, we assume, because children tend to personalize abuse, is if they do this to me, then that must mean that either I did something wrong or I am wrong. I am just unlovable. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, we are programmed to mistreat ourselves the same way we were mistreated, because we still have those early childhood authorities and the extensions of those authorities, like our bosses, our next door neighbor, or our lifetime partner. Well, if they treat me this way, then I must deserve it, because they wouldn't do it unless I was a bad person. And so when we think we're bad, we treat ourselves badly. So it's this, it's a form of what religious people call idolatry. You idolize someone, you put them up on the pedestal as an authority. So if they treat me this way, then I have to treat myself the same way, because they know better than I do how I should be treated.
These are 6 powerful misunderstandings that we can see every single day in ourselves and many others.
Most people practice one, or often more than one, of these 6 Pyrite rules. Oh, by the way, just as a moment of talking about how I used to do this with my clients, I would introduce this concept to them, and I had a lot of people who, more than I thought, who did not know what pyrite was. They'd never seen it, or if they had heard about it, they didn't know about it. They had heard the word pyrite, but they had never seen it, so they couldn't understand it. So one time when I was on vacation in Arkansas, I drove by a rock shop by the side of the road and got a really nice specimen of pyrite and had it on a little table right beside the sofa where most of my clients sat. And so we would talk about this, and I would ask them if they knew what it was, and a lot of them said, no, I didn't know it. So I would just reach over and pick up this big lump of pyrite, and they'd look at it, and they go, now I understand it. Now I know what you talked about. It looks really valuable. It looks like gold, if they've never seen real gold.
Sure. A
nugget of gold. And it has that shiny look to it. And so it really helped to have an object lesson there in my office. And I had that, I guess, for 30 or 40 years.
Oh, I remember it very, very well when I would visit your office. I thought it was really cool, but I certainly didn't know what the Pyrite Rules were.
Yeah. So that helped to explain to a lot of people, and they got the message a lot better. So if the listeners here have never seen a piece of pyrite, it'd be good to look it up online or something, or go to a rock shop somewhere and look at it, and it makes perfect sense then. It looks like the real thing, just like these rules look like that they're really the way you ought to live your life, but in the end, it brings a lot of pain and suffering.
Yet again, we've learned so many things wrong in our culture.
Oh, yes.
Would you just like to close out, just finishing up reading this?
I will.
Okay.
As the name implies, Pyrite rules are foolish attitudes and can only result in damaged relationships and harm to oneself. I'm aware that it's difficult to follow the Golden Rule consistently. While it requires almost no effort at all to practice the Pyrite rules, they're so much a part of our everyday life that we use them automatically. It usually requires deliberate thought, like we talked about earlier, intentional thought, and conscious effort for us to resist them and to choose the golden rule instead. Study these Pyrite rules carefully so you can recognize them when you or others use them. Commit yourself to avoid them when possible. Focus on and practice the golden rule as often as you can. You will soon find that you and your relationships will be healthier and happier when you develop the habit of treating others the way you want them to treat you.
You can't be more simple than that. It's just straightforward down the line.
It's a basic rule of life that most people have great difficulty practicing because of the insanity of the world in which all of us are born.
Well, you've given us all, I'm sure, a great deal to think about, just bringing up the golden rule again.
Hopefully it helps.
Yeah. All right, we will be doing chapter 22, how to develop a good self-concept, next time.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. Again, Dr. Austin's ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribe, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We look forward to having you join us for our next podcast.